Ever get that feeling? Like you really want to grasp something, go beyond just skimming the surface. But who has the time, right? We all want that deep understanding, the kind that really sticks with you. Well, that's what we're all about here. And today, we're taking a deep dive into a publication that wasn't just reporting on history, it was shaping it. The Chicago Defender, especially for African Americans.
It's a fascinating story, and the listener has given us so much to work with. Notes, excerpts, really digging into the impact of this newspaper. I think our mission here is to go beyond just the facts and figures and uncover the core of what made the Defender so important, and maybe unearth some surprises along the way.
It's not just a history lesson, right? We're talking about how a single newspaper became this huge force for social change, gave a voice to a community, and even mobilized political power, which feels incredibly relevant today when we're all trying to make sense of media and its role. So let's unpack this. What was the vision of the man who started it all, Robert Abbott?
Well, even when he was struggling to get the Defender off the ground, Abbott had this crystal clear goal. He wanted to create a sense of pride and dignity for African American children. This wasn't just news, it was about building a positive identity.
And that idea really comes through in the Bud Billiken Parade, right?
Absolutely. That parade wasn't just a fun event, it strategically challenged the negative images of Black children that were so common in mainstream media. And by showcasing positive images, it fostered this sense of belonging, a pride that really had an impact. And if you think about it, that speaks volumes about how media can shape not just opinions, but our very identity.
It wasn't just about building community within, though. The Defender was a driving force behind the Great Migration. And wasn't just reporting on it, they were encouraging it.
Exactly. People were moving north, seeking opportunities, and the Defender became a vital tool in that movement. It acted as this national communications vehicle for African Americans. And this was long before the internet or even widespread telephone use, so imagine that.
Families spread out, needing a way to connect.
Exactly. They relied on the Defender to stay in touch, to find out about jobs and housing up north, and to understand their experiences through a shared lens. It makes you think about how important media is for connecting communities that are geographically separated. It creates a shared narrative.
And that reach translated into real political power. The Defender didn't shy away from getting involved in campaigns, endorsing candidates, mobilizing voters. They weren't just observers, they were active participants.
Oh, yeah, they understood their influence and weren't afraid to use it. They advocated for their readers. And it's interesting to remember that the audience wasn't a monolith. When they created the Chicago Defender Junior section, it showed how sensitive they were to the different needs within the community. Engaging young readers was crucial.
It really speaks to their understanding of their audience, knowing that there were diverse interests within the community. Let's talk about the man behind all of this, Robert Abbott. What shaped his vision?
There's this incredible resilience in Abbott's family history. His mother, Flora, teaching herself to read and write in secret, tracing letters on tissue paper. Imagine that. It's a powerful image of the thirst for knowledge. And then Abbott himself, learning the printing trade at Hampton Institute, mastering this rapidly changing technology.
Oh, like the perfect foundation.
Right. Witnessing his mother's struggle for literacy and then him mastering the tools of mass communication. And on top of that, he toured with the Hampton Quartet, which exposed him to a wider view of the Black experience across the country. But when he got to Chicago, it wasn't instant success, was it?
Definitely not. He faced his fair share of setbacks, rejections.
Oh, for sure. But he was persistent, and his connection to the stroll on State Street was key. This was the heart of Black Chicago, a vibrant street full of life, businesses, and where news traveled fast. Abbott knew he had to be part of that world to connect with his audience.
He is right there in the thick of it.
Exactly. He was listening to conversations, taking the pulse of the community, and pretty soon he started to connect with some influential figures who would help the Defender take off, like Colonel John Marshall.
Yeah, Marshall's an interesting character.
Oh, definitely. He used the Defender to get the word out about his community work, giving the paper much-needed visibility. But he also connected Abbott with people involved in Taft's presidential campaign.
Leading to those early advertising dollars, right? Crucial for any new business.
Absolutely. Vital in those early days. And it's fascinating how the Defender's coverage of Marshall was so much more respectful than what you saw in the white press. It shows their commitment to authentic representation.
Speaking of contrasting coverage, you can't ignore how the Defender treated Jack Johnson's victories compared to the white press. It's a textbook example of the paper's mission.
Couldn't agree more. When Johnson, a black man, became heavyweight champion, the white press was largely outraged. They couldn't believe it, and their coverage was full of racism, desperately searching for a white boxer to defeat him.
The whole Great White Hope narrative.
Exactly. But the Defender celebrated Johnson. They highlighted his achievements, providing this narrative that was missing everywhere else. Even little details, like the Chicago Tribune focusing on Johnson's clothes while begrudgingly acknowledging his intelligence, it reveals a lot. The Defender offered a vital counterpoint to this biased coverage.
But it wasn't just about representation in sports. Abbott used the Defender to fight for economic justice too, like the campaign for the Pullman porters.
Absolutely. The Defender exposed the awful conditions these porters faced. Long hours, lack of sleep, constant disrespect from passengers. They were even all called George, regardless of their actual names. And there was zero chance of advancement.
It's dehumanizing.
Completely. Abbott used the paper to fight for better wages, better treatment, taking on the powerful Pullman company.
And he tackled the horrific racial violence happening in the South head on. They called it a propaganda war with the South, and that's a powerful image.
It really captures the intensity of that struggle. Here's this small Chicago paper, just 8 pages, taking on the entire Southern media establishment. The case of Mrs. A.B. Walker is a chilling example.
The way those Southern papers covered it.
It's shocking. They admitted there was a confrontation, but denied the rape, even portraying her husband as the criminal for defending her. And one paper even suggested a suitable lynching place. It's horrifying. But despite the risks, the Defender was determined to expose these injustices, to tell the truth.
And it extended to politics. Even when Woodrow Wilson, who some black voters had hoped for, was elected, the Defender didn't hold back when he didn't deliver.
It's important to remember that the Defender initially noted that a lot of black voters supported Wilson, but that optimism vanished quickly. Within months, not only had Wilson failed to deliver on his promises about racial equality, he'd actually overseen the segregation of federal departments.
It's a complete reversal.
Totally. And the Defender voiced the community's disappointment. They printed petitions from disillusioned voters, even called Wilson a figurehead controlled by racist Southern congressmen. It's bold.
All while the paper itself was growing, becoming more prominent. And Abbott had this core team around him, right? Like Smiley.
Oh, Smiley was crucial. He was instrumental in expanding the reach, managing the growing content, a vital partner in connecting with a larger audience. It's sad he didn't live to see the full scale of the Defender's success, but his contributions were huge, and he was definitely remembered within the organization.
So as we get into the 1910s, we see the Defender's influence really growing. And the special edition they put out for Booker T. Washington's death shows how central they were as a news source.
Absolutely. It's amazing how quickly they produced that edition. It highlights how vital they were for getting timely news to African Americans across the country. And then you have World War I creating some unexpected economic opportunities in the North. And the Defender was there to report on them.
Connecting those global events to local impact.
Exactly. They weren't just saying people are moving north. They were saying, here's why, here are the jobs, here's what you need to know. But at the same time, they didn't shy away from reporting on the horrific racial violence that was still happening. The lynching of Jesse Washington, as told by a white witness.
That account is just brutal.
It's truly horrifying. The cruelty, the scale of the mob, and the fact that a white person felt compelled to share this with the Defender shows just how much credibility they had. They were committed to exposing these acts, no matter how dangerous it was.
And what's amazing is that during all this growth, their actual operation was still pretty modest.
Oh, yeah. Here's this paper with national influence, and their office is basically a bedroom next to the kitchen in Abbott's landlady's apartment. And Abbott was very hands-on, often greeting the staff in his bathrobe. Lucius Harper's memories of those early days really paint a picture.
It was a family affair.
In a way, yes. But the Defender's role in the Great Migration went beyond just reporting. They were actively guiding it. They were like an unofficial guidebook for those moving north.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. They provided practical information, job opportunities, housing costs, what life was like. They really facilitated that massive movement of people. Then you have the Chicago race riot of 1919, this horrific event that the Defender covered in detail.
It must have been a difficult and dangerous time for them.
Oh, incredibly. They didn't shy away from reporting the violence, how it disproportionately affected African Americans. And for the Defender itself, the riot disrupted their printing. It showed how vulnerable they were.
It's a wake-up call.
Absolutely. It fueled Robert Abbott's determination to have their own printing plant. They needed to be self-sufficient to keep publishing no matter what. This was a turning point.
And Abbott's influence in the city kept growing. He was even appointed to that commission investigating the riot.
That's right. 12 members, half black, half white. It shows how much his stature had grown and how important the Defender was seen in understanding what led to the riot. But even within the black community, there were different views on how to move forward, like the disagreements with Marcus Garvey.
That was a pretty contentious relationship.
Oh, for sure. The Defender was very critical of Garvey and his UNIA. They had fundamentally different approaches to black empowerment, and it led to this public feud, even spilling into Garvey's own newspaper, The Negro World. It's a good reminder that while the Defender was powerful, it wasn't the only voice. There were passionate debates within the community.
In the midst of all this, they create the Bud Billiken character and the Chicago Defender Jr. section.
Such creative and forward-thinking initiatives. Launching those in 1921 shows Abbott's commitment to young readers. Lucius Harper's story about finding the first Bud Billiken among the newsboys is fantastic. They were building community pride, positive identity from a young age, shaping future generations.
And they went beyond just reporting on hard news. They celebrated black achievement in all areas, like Bessie Coleman, the first black woman with an international pilot's license.
It's a fantastic example. By highlighting her accomplishments, the Defender was challenging those racial barriers, showing their readers what was possible, inspiring them, expanding their horizons.
But even with all the success, they faced their own challenges. That scandal with their business manager, Phil Jones.
Oh, that must have been devastating for Abbott. Jones had been there almost from the start. That betrayal of trust had to be a huge blow. It reminds you that even within organizations with high ideals, human failings happen.
And there were rifts with other figures, like A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters.
Right. Some felt the Defender was getting too moderate. And this created space for competitors, like the Pittsburgh Courier. It shows the dynamic landscape of the black press and how the Defender had to adapt to stay relevant.
Abbott's trip to Europe in the late 1920s gave him a global perspective on racism.
It was eye-opening for him. Seeing the human zoo in Hamburg, where black people were put on display, was horrifying. But then the positive reception in Berlin, where the hotel defended his right to stay, showed how different racism can be around the world. And representing the entire black press of America at that publishers' conference in Berlin, that shows how much his stature had grown internationally.
Back in Chicago, they were navigating the world of local politics, like covering Mayor Big Bill Thompson, who had this complex relationship with the black community.
Thompson was a controversial figure, but his courting of the black vote was a reality, and the Defender reported on it, including the racist backlash from the white South. It's a reminder of the constant interplay of race, power, and politics.
And as the Great Depression hit and FDR's New Deal took shape, the Defender managed to get an exclusive interview with the president.
That's huge. And FDR acknowledged how influential the Defender was in shaping the Democratic platform on issues impacting black Americans. It shows how much their clout had grown on the national stage.
But even with that, Abbott stayed a Republican in the 1936 election. He was his own man.
Absolutely. He stuck with the Republicans despite the popularity of the New Deal. He was independent, willing to criticize anyone regardless of party. He even pointed out how some New Deal programs were failing black Americans. Then you have Mary McLeod Bethune visiting the Defender, offering this snark reminder of the struggles in the South.
It's a reality check.
Totally. She was working within the Roosevelt administration, yet she was honest about the deep-seated inequality, how the fight was far from over. And then there's that massive Bud Billiken parade honoring Joe Louis.
It must have been an incredible event.
It was a huge celebration of black culture and economic power in Chicago. And it's interesting that Abbott allowed the Young Communist League to march, despite objections. It shows his nuanced view of alliances and the fight for equality. He was willing to work with those who shared that goal, even if they disagreed on other things. As Abbott's health declined, he took steps to ensure the Defender's future. He created a trust and named his nephew, John Sengstack, as a key executor.
It shows how much he cared about the paper's legacy.
Absolutely. He was committed to seeing its work continue. And when he passed away in 1940, the tributes that poured in from all over the world showed how much of an impact he'd had. He built something truly remarkable.
So, the leadership passed to his nephew, John Sengstack. How did he handle the challenges of World War II?
Sengstack had big shoes to fill, and he did it during a very turbulent time. At first, he was skeptical of the war, like Abbott had been. But as the threat of Nazism became clear, He shifted the defender's stance to support the war effort.
It was a pragmatic move.
Very much so. But they didn't abandon the fight for equality at home. They championed the Double V campaign, victory abroad and victory against racism at home. And this outspokenness put them under scrutiny, even facing potential censorship.
It's a reminder that even during war, the fight for justice continues.
Exactly. And despite that threat of censorship, the defender endorsed FDR for a third term. It was a major break from their Republican past.
A sign of how much the political landscape was shifting.
Absolutely. Sengstack argued that black voters' loyalty to the Republicans had been earned, and now both parties had to compete for their votes. That endorsement and the huge black turnout for FDR shows the defender's political power. But there were also those legal challenges to Abbott's will.
Those were pretty ugly.
Yeah, including that lawsuit claiming Abbott's widow was white, which was baseless and racist. Even Time magazine got involved, suggesting the defender's best days were over.
They underestimated Sengstack.
They did. He engaged directly with the government during the war. He met with Attorney General Biddle to discuss censorship, advocating for a free black press, and he met with Navy Secretary Knox, pushing for more opportunities for black officers.
It's about taking action, not just reporting.
Absolutely. And those meetings led to real progress, more recognition for black contributions. But even as the defender supported the war, the FBI was watching them.
J. Edgar Hoover was obsessed with the black press.
It's true. They put together this report on alleged communist influence. The defender was included, even though they supported the war effort. They pointed to articles on racial inequality and pro-Soviet views as evidence.
It's paranoia and prejudice rolled into one.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the defender kept playing a major role in politics, like their coverage of Truman being selected as FDR's running mate.
That was a big deal.
It was. People like William L. Dawson worked hard to mobilize black voters for the Roosevelt-Truman ticket, especially because FDR had promised to start desegregating the military. And the black turnout in the 1944 election shows how influential the defender was. Then, when FDR suddenly died, they were cautious about Truman.
Understandably so.
They acknowledged the smooth transition, but they were worried about some of Truman's early appointments, particularly those with segregationist views. It shows how committed they were to holding leaders accountable on civil rights, regardless of party. And then you have Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in baseball.
A huge moment in American history.
A landmark moment. And the defender, particularly Fay Young, had been pushing for integration in sports for years. They were thrilled about Robinson and even gave advice to black fans on how to behave at games, knowing the world was watching.
They understood the gravity of that moment.
Absolutely. And Truman eventually delivered on desegregating the military. Huge victory.
And Sengstack and the defender were ecstatic.
Oh, they celebrated it. They even set up a fundraising committee to support the integration process. And they covered the findings of the Freedom to Serve Committee in detail, highlighting both the progress and the work still to be done. And this period saw the rise of Ethel Payne at the Defender.
A true pioneer in journalism.
Absolutely. Even before joining full-time, she was writing about Japanese African-American couples after the war, these overlooked stories. It shows Sengstack's openness to different perspectives. And then, of course, there's the Brown v. Board of Education ruling in 1954.
A pivotal moment.
A landmark decision. And the Defender knew it. They saw it as this huge step towards dismantling segregation. But they were also smart enough to know that legal victories weren't enough. They highlighted the importance of implementation, of a clear timetable for desegregation. They knew the fight wasn't over. And Ethel Payne kept pushing for change. Her questioning of Eisenhower at press conferences.
He wasn't always happy about it.
No, he wasn't. He got defensive, even hostile. It shows the resistance to the civil rights movement and the risks journalists like Payne took. She even got criticized by some in the black press for being too direct. It was a complex time. And then came the horrific murder of Emmett Till in 1955.
A tragedy that shocked the nation.
And the Defender played a huge role in bringing that story to light. They published that powerful image of Mamie Till Bradley at the train station with her son's body. They interviewed the Mississippi governor who offered this weak condemnation. They made sure the world saw the horror of that crime. And even after the acquittal of Till's murderers, they kept reporting.
They kept the pressure on.
Absolutely. They covered the kidnapping charges, highlighting the injustice of the Jim Crow South. Then you have the Montgomery bus boycott, another turning point.
And the Defender recognized the significance of it right away.
Ethel Payne's reporting from Montgomery was crucial. She saw the power of the boycott and Dr. King's leadership early on. She called him a new Moses. And the Defender's support for the boycott amplified King's message, helped build the movement. and the boycott's eventual success was a major victory.
It showed the power of nonviolent resistance.
It did, and the defenders celebrated it. Then you have the crisis in Little Rock, with Alex Wilson facing danger while covering the integration of Central Highs.
It was a dangerous time for reporters, especially black reporters.
Absolutely. Wilson witnessed the governor's defiance, the violence against the students. He put himself at risk to get the story out. Then in the 1960 election, the defender offered a nuanced view of the candidates, eventually endorsing Kennedy.
A significant choice.
There were concerns about Johnson, but they felt Kennedy was more committed to civil rights, especially after Eleanor Roosevelt vouched for him. And that endorsement, combined with the efforts of people like William L. Dawson, likely helped Kennedy win that close election. When the Freedom Riders faced that horrific violence, the defender was right there with them.
They were unwavering in their support.
They admired the riders' bravery, but they were furious about the violence. They even suggested that self-defense might be necessary, reflecting the frustration in the black community. And they celebrated the ICC's ruling against segregation in interstate travel. It was a victory for the writers and for everyone fighting for equality.
There were some changes at the Defender around this time, with Ben Burns returning as editor, but it sounds like the media landscape was shifting, making it harder to attract black journalists.
It was. Integrated outlets offered more money, more resources. The Defender had to adapt. And Vernon Jarrett's rise as a columnist was a big development.
He was a powerful voice.
Oh, absolutely. He took on Superintendent Willis and Mayor Daley directly about school segregation. But that confrontational approach created some tension with Sangstack, who preferred a more behind-the-scenes style. Then Dr. King came to Chicago to fight housing segregation.
And the Defender covered it closely.
They did. They reported on King's efforts, published his prayer for Chicago, highlighted his critiques of northern segregation. But Sangstack was a bit more critical of King's organizing tactics in Chicago, even while admiring his overall vision. And when the 1967 riots broke out,
A dark moment for the city.
the Defender didn't hold back. They blamed Daley and his administration, calling out their failure to address poverty, discrimination, police brutality. They also defended King against accusations that he'd incited violence.
They weren't afraid to speak truth to power.
Never. And the housing marches that followed into white neighborhoods like Gage Park, those exposed the deep racism that still existed. The Defender documented the hostility, the hatred faced by those peaceful marchers. It was a stark reminder of the work still to be done. The rise of the Black Power movement was another challenge.
It was a complex and controversial movement.
It was, and Sangstack urged responsible journalism within the black press. He warned against sensationalism, encouraging them to be a positive force for change. And when the police attacked protesters at the 1968 Democratic Convention,
A shameful chapter in Chicago's history.
absolutely. And the Defender pointed out that even black journalists covering the event were targeted. It shows how pervasive the police violence was. And then Louis Martin, with his experience in Washington, returned to the Defender as executive editor.
A valuable addition.
Oh, definitely. He brought political insight, connections at the highest level. It strengthened the Defender's ability to analyze national politics, advocate for their readers, and they covered the Black Panthers raid closely, highlighting the community's skepticism about the police account.
That raid was incredibly controversial.
It was, and the Defender gave voice to those doubts, especially about the deaths of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. They raised questions about police tactics and potential political motivations. It's interesting that Robert McClory, a white journalist, started his career at the Defender.
It speaks to their reputation.
It does. He found a welcoming environment, built important sources within the black community. It shows how respected the Defender was, even outside of that community. And they continued to hold powerful institutions accountable. Like when Congressman Metcalf challenged the police department over misconduct.
They gave him a platform.
Exactly. They amplified his demands for reform. It's that tradition of speaking truth to power. And Ethel Payne returning to Chicago as associate editor.
That was a coup for Sangstack.
Oh, he knew how valuable Payne was. He convinced her to come back, showing his commitment to maintaining the Defender's high standards. And then there's Harold Washington's first run for mayor in 1977.
Didn't work out that time, but
Their coverage showed his strength in the black community and his determination to challenge the political establishment. It foreshadowed what was to come. In his later years, Sangstack was focused on securing the Defender's future.
it was more than just a business for him.
It was a vital black institution. He even compared it to Provident Hospital. He wanted to ensure its survival. And then, of course, Harold Washington won the mayor's office in 1983. The Defender's endorsement was interesting.
It wasn't a full-throated endorsement, was it?
No, it was cautious. They urged Washington to unite the city, bring order. They even criticized some of his tactics and the behavior of his opponent's supporters. They remained independent, critical even of their allies. As we move into the 1990s, Ethan Michaeli's time at the paper gives us this glimpse behind the scenes.
It's a personal perspective on the paper's later years.
Exactly. He shows the dedication of the staff, even as the media landscape kept changing. People like Chinta Strausberg and Walter Lowe carried on the Defender's tradition of community journalism and their coverage of the police sweep at Cabrini Green.
That was a controversial event.
Oh, for sure. And the Defender challenged the official narrative, gave voice to the residents. They were still holding power accountable. And they covered Nelson Mandela's visit to Chicago.
What a moment that must have been.
A truly historic event. The Defender was there to capture it, connecting the local community to this global celebration of the fight against apartheid. When John Sengstacke passed away in 1997, it was the end of an era.
He left a huge legacy.
He did. And the tributes he received showed how much he'd done for the Defender and for the Black community. And Vernon Jarrett's final column before he died in 2004.
Another powerful voice gone.
It marked the end of an era, but the Defender itself continued, and its return to Bronzeville was a beautiful thing.
It's like coming home.
Absolutely. And Mayor Daley acknowledging the Defender's role in the Great Migration, the connection between his family and the Sengstacks, it brought everything full circle.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that the Chicago Defender was so much more than just a newspaper. It was a vital source of information, a fierce advocate, a community builder, a political force. Its impact is undeniable.
Couldn't agree more. They didn't just report on history, they shaped it. And it makes you think about the role of independent media today. In this digital age, with all its possibilities and challenges, how do we ensure that kind of impactful journalism continues? It's a question worth pondering.
It really is. The Chicago Defender set a high bar, and their story is an inspiration for anyone who believes in the power of media to make a difference.